Our last PowerPoint for Chapter 12 is going to be about vision. So we have several accessory organs whose job it is to help the eye's visual receptors for our sense of sight. Some of these are going to be the upper eyelids, the lacrimal apparatus, which is responsible for tear production and drainage, and then the muscles outside of the eye that help move them, and we call those extrinsic, X meaning outside, and we have 6 of those muscles. You can see here on the diagram of the eye, here's the lacrimal gland. It shows you the upper and lower eyelids, orbit, sclera, some other components that we're going to be looking at. We have several different refraction orders that can cause changes in abnormal vision. So let's start by looking at the normal eye here. We have the retina here in the back, and then the point of focus should be there on the retina. So you've got 3 lines basically showing in with what should normally happen, all right? So in astigmatism, a curvature or some other defect in the lens or cornea can cause some parts of an image to focus to not be in focus on the some to be in focus and some parts to not be in focus, and this can cause blurry or distorted vision. We can also have what we call myopia, which is what we see here in the top, where the eye is too long. The point of focus then lies in front of the retina, and you can see that here. The point of focus is here instead of back here, all right? So in a normal eye, the focus point should be on the retina. All right, and so hyperopia, which is what we see down here, hyper meaning above, myo referring to usually to muscle, but hyper meaning above. So farsightedness, this is if the eye is too short. So this is the opposite problem. The focus point then lies behind the retina. You can see that the focus point then is back here, all right? And so for many people, when you hit around 40 or 45, everything starts looking very, very small, so you have to pull it away, because that is a normal change as we age, a normal degeneration, so to speak, of our vision. So it seems like everything is much smaller, and because that focus point is too far behind, we have to pull it away. And then, of course, if you have myopia, you're going to want to bring it up really close. The palpebra is going to be what we normally call the eyelid. It is made of 4 layers: skin, muscle, connective tissue, and conjunctiva. The skin of the eyelid is the thinnest in the body. It covers the outer surface of the lid. The orbicularis oculi and levator palpebra superioris are the muscles that move the eyelids. The connective tissue of the eye has what we call a tarsal gland, and these are modified sebaceous glands that carry oily secretions to the eyelashes and that help keep them from sticking together. The conjunctiva is a thin layer or mucous membrane. It is normally transparent and allows us to actually see the blood vessels in our eye. You're probably familiar with conjunctivitis, which is pink eye, and that's inflammation of the conjunctiva. This is often viral or bacterial in origin. Next, we have the lacrimal apparatus. This is what we think of when we talk about tear ducts, all right? So it's a little more complicated than that, but a lacrimal apparatus is made of the lacrimal gland, which secretes tears. There's a series of ducts that carry tears onto the nasal cavity. Tears are continuously secreted across the eye. They moisten and lubricate the surface of the eye, and they contain an enzyme called lysozyme, which is antibacterial. The superior and inferior caniculi, and you can see those here on this picture. Here's the superior and inferior caniculi there, and the lacrimal gland over here. These collect the tears, and then it moves down through the lacrimal sac, deep in the lacrimal, resides deep in the lacrimal bone, and then onto the nasolacrimal duct, and then empties on into the nasal cavity. So we have 6 extrinsic eye muscles, or muscles located just on the outside of the eye. We've got 3 of those that are rectus muscles. Rectus means long and flat, and these 6 muscles work together to move the eye in different directions. So we'll start with the superior rectus. So we have the superior rectus here. Superior means above. So this is one of the muscles above, one of the long flat muscles above that rotates the eye upward and towards the midline. We then have the inferior rectus here, inferior rectus, which rotates the eye, inferior meaning below, so the inferior rectus rotates the eye downward and towards the midline. And then lastly on this slide we have the medial rectus, which is going to be the one towards the middle here, and this is going to rotate the eye towards the midline. Next, we have the lateral rectus, which rotates the eye away from the midline, which of course is what lateral means. So it is cut away here so that you can see, but the lateral rectus would be right here. So then we have the superior oblique. So we know superior means above, so we know it's going to be one of these above, and then oblique we know means at a kind of a transverse type section. It's going to be lying obliquely, so it rotates the eye down and away from the midline. And that one is going to be right here. And then lastly we have the inferior oblique. All right, inferior oblique, and the inferior oblique is going to rotate the eye upward and away from the midline. The eye itself is hollow. Now that does not mean empty, but it has a hollow chamber and it is spherical, of course. It has three main layers. We have what we call the outer fibrous tunic, the middle or vascular tunic, and the inner or nervous tunic. And that of course reflects what is inside each of these layers. Alright, so now we're looking here at some of the individual components of the eye. We'll start with the cornea. You can see the cornea here. So the cornea is here. It is the transparent, so to speak, window of the eye, and this helps light focus entering the eye. This is made mostly of connective tissues and does not contain any blood vessels. Next we have the sclera, which is the white portion of the eye, and it is in the posterior, and you can see the sclera here. Okay, so this is the sclera back here. This is a kind of opaque. There's lots of collagen and elastin built in here. This helps to protect the eye in its attachment, and it is an attachment site for those extrinsic muscles. And this is pierced by the optic nerve and blood vessels, as you can see towards the back of the eye. You also have a nerve located near, the optic nerve located here, coming through. It's harder to see in this picture, but it's going to be coming through here in this area here. The middle tunic of the eye contains the iris, the ciliary body, and the choroid coat. We also call the middle tunic the vascular tunic. You can see the choroid coat here, which is close to the retina. So here's the choroid coat here, okay, which lies just anterior, so to speak, to the retina. It joins the sclera and contains many blood vessels. These supply the nearby tissues. It also contains melanocytes, which produce pigment and give the brownish black appearance to the choroid coat. Melanin in these tissues also serves to absorb some of the excess light. Next we have the ciliary body. You can see the ciliary body here, so it's here. This forms a ring inside the anterior or front portion of the eye. It contains some folded ciliary processes and some smooth muscle, and these together form the ciliary muscle. After that we have the, well, before we go there, we have suspensory ligaments here. You can see that on the diagram here as well. So we have some suspensory ligaments there that help to hold the lens in place. The body of the lens is transparent and helps the eye to focus on objects by changing thickness. So the iris then lastly is the colored portion of the eye. You can see that here. Here is the iris, and it's going to be right in front there. It's the colored portion of the eye, and it has special cells which can also contract to help control light intensity. So this is a little bit different perspective. We are looking from above, a superior view here. The anterior portion of the eye is filled with aqueous humor. Aqueous humor is going to be up here, okay, and the posterior portion is filled with vitreous humor, so it is a little more thick and a little more jelly-like. Aqueous humor is very, very watery. If you do a dissection of the eye, you will notice that the clear distinction between the viscosity or thickness, so to speak, of these two fluids. You can see here the cornea and the anterior chamber. We have the iris of the eye, the suspensory ligaments. You can see the conjunctiva, ciliary processes and ciliary muscles here, which form the ciliary body. And then this here is the sclera. And of course, you can see the lens very well here. So the lens is a biconcave disc. It is transparent, situated just posterior to the iris. It is made of lens fibers which have a lot of elastin in them, and it's held in place by those suspensory ligaments of the ciliary body. All right, so the ciliary body we've looked at, and this is a good close-up picture here. This forms an internal ring around the front of the eye. And of course, you've got these radiating folds here. It's just folded like this. All right, that's what radiating folds means. Those are the ciliary processes. And then the ciliary muscles contract and relax in order to move the lens to respond, in order to change focus. So accommodation is this changing in shape to view objects that are either near or far. All right, so the lens actually changes shape in order to view the objects. So this changing of shape is called accommodation, and this is where the lens can thicken due to the ciliary muscles contracting to focus on a close-up object, or the lens can thin as the ciliary muscle relaxes to see objects in the distance. And then bright light will stimulate those circular muscles and help the pupil to constrict as well. So the iris is a thin diaphragm made of connective tissue. It has muscle cells and contractile skin cells which control the size of the pupil. It is an actual hole in the iris, and dim light will stimulate those radial muscles which will cause the pupil to dilate. Bright light will stimulate the more circular muscles, and it will cause the pupil to constrict. Eye color is determined genetically, and that is caused by the amount and distribution of melanin in the eye, in the iris. Aqueous humor, as I've said, is the more watery type fluid that will come out of the anterior portion of the eye here, and you can see that this is the anterior portion where the aqueous humor is found. So it's the fluid in the anterior cavity of the eye. This fluid is secreted by epithelium on the inner surface of the ciliary body, and the function is to maintain shape of the anterior portion of the eye and to provide nutrients and of course moisture. This fluid leaves the cavity through what we call the canal of Schlemm. In the inner tunic of the eye, we have the retina, which is a very important component of the eye. This contains visual receptors that we call photoreceptors. The retina is nearly transparent, it's very thin and delicate, but it has very distinct layers. It is continuous from the optic nerve, and you can see the optic nerve here, beginning here. So continuous means it extends from the optic nerve and then comes on up here. All right, and so it goes just behind the margin of the ciliary body, and of course we said it has several layers. We have the macula lutea, which is about 1 millimeter squared. This contains the fovea centralis. This is important, the fovea centralis. This is where we have our sharpest vision in the eye. Medial to that is what we call the optic disc. The optic disc. These are where nerves leave the eye and join the optic nerve. The optic disc does not have any photoreceptors, and so we call it the blind spot. The vitreous humor is much more vitreous, all right, and so, or viscous, I should say. Viscous has to do with resistance of flow. So you can think of honey versus water. Honey would be more viscous. So the vitreous humor is going to be a more jelly-like fluid that supports the internal structures of the eye and also helps to maintain shape. It kind of holds that retina in place as well up against the choroid coat. So these are the locations of some of these important things in the inner tunic. I will tell you to pay very close attention to the images in APR, as sometimes it's kind of hard to see what is highlighted. So play with the color and the highlighting in your APR as you practice so that you can distinguish these on the APR images, and then relate those to the actual images or dissection of the eye as well. And so you can see the retina here in this first picture is highlighted in yellow. It's in yellow here. And so it would be very easy to mistake perhaps if the sclera was highlighted. So pay close attention to that. And then here is the optic disc here. Vitreous humor here is colored in blue. And you can choose in APR whatever color you want to highlight with to help you learn these things. And then here are some views from actual looking inside the eye with an instrument like you would if you were at the ophthalmologist. You can see the optic disc, the fovea centralis, and the macula lutea. The posterior cavity contains that vitreous humor, that thick gel that holds the retina flat against that choroid coat. You can't really see it very well in this picture, but if you get to dissect the eye, it is very kind of clumpy like and thicker, much thicker than the aqueous humor. All right, so we've got 5 groups of neurons, of retinal neurons, that provide a pathway for impulses to be received, interpreted, and travel to the optic nerve and onto the brain. So they travel through these retinal neurons. We have receptor cells, bipolar cells, ganglion cells. Those provide that pathway for impulses that are triggered by those photoreceptors, which is the sensory portion. And then they will eventually go to the optic nerve. We also have some horizontal cells here, and these and the amacrine cells help to modify some of these impulses. Here you can see the rods and cones, which are the 2 different types of photoreceptors that help us with our vision. This is a good summary table in your text that gives you the 3 layers or tunics of the eye and what is the main component of those. So I would be sure that you study this table here from your textbook. Light refraction is important in our vision. When we see an object, the object is either giving off light or it is reflecting light from somewhere else. So refraction is the process of bending the light. The light rays are being bent so that the image will reach the fovea centralis, that sharpest point of vision. And this does occur when they pass at this oblique angle into different mediums. So we do experience this in things like water as well. It's important to understand the difference between a convex and a concave lens and how they affect those light waves. So a convex surface here on the left causes light waves to converge or to come together. So it brings them together. Opposite of that is concave. So if it is concave, that will cause them to diverge or to spread apart. As light enters the eye, the goal again is to focus correctly on the retina. And so it's refracted by that convex surface of the cornea and of the lens, and the image is actually focused upside down and reversed from left to right. So we've got the 2 different types of photoreceptors here. We've got rods and we have cones. As you can see here, rods are longer and more thin type projections. These are going to be a little bit shorter here for cones. Rods contain rhodopsin, which is a light sensitive pigment. Cones have several. We have 3 of them here: cyanolob, chlorolob, erythrolob. Those are pigments as well. Rods are hundreds of times more sensitive to light than cones are. Cones, though, provide vision in bright light. They give us sharp images and color vision. All right, and so that's why we have the different types of pigments, because these help us with our color vision. And the fovea centralis only contains cones. Rods, however, give us our vision in dim light. They produce the black and white vision, colorless vision, and they produce the outlines of objects. So if you have something like night blindness that's not due to nutrition, it may be that you do not have as many rods as some other people. So there are differences in the amounts of these. which is also partially responsible for things like color blindness. When we correct vision, we use our understanding of the concave versus convex in order to cause light to refract and scatter, or to converge if we need it to spread further, or if we need it to get together. And so these images here are showing you that correction. Okay, so for myopia, you would use a concave lens. So if the eye is too long, you have myopia, you would use concave, which is going to help to get that adjustment. And then for hyperopia, you would want to use convex to adjust. Let's look at the different visual pigments here. So the color receptors in the retina are most sensitive to light waves that are red, green, and blue. And you can see the correlations here. Erythrolabe is red, chlorolabe green, cyanolabe blue. In order to see white light, well, first off, the color perceived depends on which sets of cones are stimulated. All right, so if it stimulates red and blue, you might perceive that as purple. In order to see white light, you would have all of these stimulated. Visual sensations from images focused on the side of the retina can often be blurry because there are more rods than cones in these regions. All right. Rhodopsin is the light sensitive pigment in rods, and it can decompose or break down in the presence of light, which causes a series of reactions that triggers that nerve impulse down the optic nerve. And so remember that cones are for colored vision, and the stimulation of certain pigments in those cones is how we perceive different colors, and in order to see white light, we need all three of these to be stimulated. Rhodopsin is the pigment for rods. Rhodopsin R, rods R, remember that. Stereoscopic vision, also called stereopsis, helps us to perceive distance and depth, height and width. This is due to the difference or actually the distance between our eyes being between 6 and 7 centimeters. And this allows us to actually see objects in 3D. It also occurs because we're getting the formation of two slightly different retinal images, and we put those together, and that gives us that 3D view. So species that do not have the 6 to 7 centimeter distance do not necessarily have stereoscopic vision. So that is a beneficial feature that we have. This is illustrating that visual pathway, including the optic nerve, optic chiasma tract, and optic radiations. The blue lines here show the path of information from the right eye, and the yellow show the path of information from the left eye. And you can see there is a partial crossing over at the optic chiasma, which is here. Vision is definitely not constant. It changes over the period of your life. It changes all through childhood till usually about 12, when your eyes are kind of set for a while. Then by the age of 40, you often have to start holding things further away in order to focus. By 50, taste and smell begin to disappear. We actually lose some of those olfactory receptors due to degeneration. By 60, 25% of people have some hearing loss. And between ages 65 to 75, that moves up to a third. By age 85, half of all people have hearing loss. There are some age-related problems: dry eyes, which is very painful; floaters, which is due to crystals in vitreous humors, and you can see things actually passing across your eye; loss of elasticity, which can decrease your ability to accommodate; glaucoma, and that is usually caused by accumulation of aqueous humor and causes pressure in your eye, and this is what they check for at the optometrist, where they blow in your eye and check the pressure there. Cataracts are a common condition for older people, where the lens becomes cloudy, it's opaque and often discolored, and that makes vision very poor, and it can be bad enough that images aren't able to focus. And when you are not able to focus, this can cause blindness because your brain has to shut that off. Treatment for a cataract is removal of the lens. Then you can also have macular degeneration, which can cause blindness, and of course there's other issues as well.